Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode. Oh, we are not doing a regular episode. We're trying something new here, everybody. We are, as you can probably see, we have some visuals for this episode. Gavin had an idea, so hello, everybody. This is episode 1 of our YouTube extra series for I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. If you happen to see this video first before you've heard any of the podcast, definitely check it out. But
yeah, absolutely.
We're doing something extra today. Gavin, what the hell are we doing?
So, you might have noticed in a previous episode, if you are a follower of the podcast, that we did an episode a while back about the Paleontology of Pokemon, episode 49 to be specific.
This is true. You should listen to the episode. It was good stuff.
Yeah, and so where I sort of describe sort of some of the fossil Pokemon to Mike, as well as some Pokemon that are fossil adjacent or fossil like. However, I think Mike only looked up one or two of them, and I know that I did not do a good enough job of just properly describing them to him. So, we're going to get Mike's sort of real-time reactions to some of these fossil Pokemon. And the reason why we did that episode in the first place is because however much you're thinking, Pokemon is a game for children, which, it is, but some of the people that work on these games clearly, at least have kids who enjoy fossils and paleontology and dinosaurs and things. And so they include that in some of the games in a way that is potentially really neat, depending on who you ask and which specific Pokemon you're looking at. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to describe some of these fossil Pokemon as well as what their real-world sort of counterparts are, because all of them are based on real-world fossil animals, even if they do have quite a few liberties taken from those actual real-life animals. But I know that I did not do a good enough job describing them to Mike, so instead he's just going to see them here.
So I assume this is a Pokemon game. What Pokemon game are we working with?
So we're going to be bouncing between two different games. This one is Pokemon Shield, which one of the controversial things about this game is that they didn't include every single Pokemon. At this point, I believe there are 898 thereabout.
Wow.
And so for one reason or another, depending on whether you believe people who didn't like this decision or whether you believe the game developers, they didn't include every single Pokemon. So some of the fossil Pokemon are not in this game, so we'll be bouncing to between this game, which is Pokemon Shield, and bouncing to Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, which has some other Pokemon in it as well.
All right, let's get started.
Absolutely. So this right here is, we're going to start and just go through the same way we did in the episode, go through the Pokemon generations. They started in Generation 1 back in 1996 with, if like Mike and I, you are a child of the 90s, with Pokemon Red and Blue. That's what what was the game when I was a kid and when I was born, actually, is when those came out in Japan. And so we're going to start with the Generation 1 Pokemon all the way up through Generation 8, which is what this current game is from. So,
is this like, the Red and Blue, we're talking like, Pikachu and Squirtle and Charizard and...
Yeah, absolutely.
Like the real OG. All right, so even as somebody who was not a big Pokemon fan growing, I respected it, but I didn't get into it, I guess is the best way I could describe it.
Mm-hmm.
I know a little bit of the OG Pokemon, so this would be a cool little test for me as well. Just how legit of a millennial am I?
All right, so first here on the screen with me we have Omanite. Omanite is a little guy, a little Pokemon based off of the real-world animals called Ammonites. They are, as we've previously described them, swirly-shelled squid boys. And they were basically cephalopods, so relatives of squid and octopi that had these big shells on them like this. However, in the real world, Ammonites sort of swim in the water up in the column instead of this guy who's sort of walking along the ground here.
That was kind of my first reaction, was just by the look of it, it should be a water creature. And, I mean, look at that poor bastard. Like, it is slow. That's not something that should be on land.
Exactly. And there are, if you know anything about Pokemon, you probably know that there are different types of Pokemon. So all of the fossil Pokemon, with the exception of some, which we will talk about at the very end, are rock type, which is fun because, fossils, rocks. But they almost all of them have a second type as well. And so Omanite is a water type Pokemon, so it does belong in the water. It doesn't fit quite right on land, as you can probably see.
You're not kidding.
So
can we put this guy out of his misery?
Absolutely. And so when they evolve, because as you might know, Pokemon evolve not in the same way that you think of with biological evolution. Pokemon evolve, and so Omanite evolves into this guy here, Omastar, and basically it just gets bigger, and it's got more arms, like Ammonites in real life probably had. It also gets some spikes on its shell, which I think in the podcast episode I said, I don't remember exactly what I said, but I said it wouldn't surprise me if there were some, but I didn't know of any that had spikes on their shell like that, because Ammonites were an incredibly diverse group of animals around for, probably upward of 100 million years. So, and that's nothing to say of other cephalopods, squid relatives with shells. They've been around for close to 500 million years. So I don't know of any specific species that had spikes and things on their shells, but I definitely have seen some that have, because I looked into it.
So this kind of thing existed in some form somewhere. You don't know the specifics, but something that looked similar to this was a thing.
Exactly, or at least with some kind of ornamentation on the shell like that.
Gotcha. So, okay. Ornamentation, that's a good word.
Yeah. And so, interestingly, something that is really fun about the Pokemon games is that they have this thing in them called the Pokédex, which is, every time you capture a new Pokemon, it gives you like a little blurb of like flavor text about them. And I don't remember exactly what it says for this game, because it varies from game to game. Obviously, these Pokemon were, from Generation 1 way back in 1996. They've been in a lot of games, and so they have a lot of different Pokedex blurbs about them. At various points, it is said that Omastar went extinct because its shell grew too big to be able to swim and outswim its predators, essentially. Which I think, as I mentioned in our episode about this, that's not really how extinction or evolution works.
I was going to say that I have a couple of questions if that's what the explanation is.
Yeah, so it wouldn't really be it... excuse my dog drinking in the background. It wouldn't really be it, not being able to swim fast enough. Either, things don't really drive each other to extinction per se, with the exception of humans. Humans like to make things go extinct. But it would really end up being sort of like, competition for something else. They would either, not be able to catch food. That'd be a reason why being too heavy could make you go extinct. Or it wouldn't be that it just grew too heavy and you couldn't swim anymore. That's not really a thing.
Right.
So that is one pair of the Generation 1 fossils. And fossils always come in pairs. So this is one pair. And the second pair...
You mean like Pokemon fossils always come in pairs?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so Pokemon fossils always come in pairs. So there are 2 per generation with an asterisk, which we'll get to. So this is the other set of fossils from the first generation, which is Kabuto, which is based off of a horseshoe crab, an animal that is still around today, which is, as we talked about, I think, in our episode about living fossils, which was pretty early. I don't remember that episode number off the top of my head, but it was pretty early. Mm-hmm. But horseshoe crabs are pretty, like, quintessential living fossils, because we have fossils of horseshoe crabs going back, over 300 million years, and they look almost exactly the same as the ones that we have today. So this is just a really successful, like, shape to do what they do, so they haven't had to change all that much. But Kabuto is interesting because they take some liberties with it, because horseshoe crabs normally have a long sort of spiny tail, which Kabuto doesn't really have here. It's just sort of that roundish shape. And then in horseshoe crabs, they do have those eyes on the top. But in Kabuto, it also has sort of those red eyes underneath, if you can see it there. So those are its real eyes.
Oh.
The ones on top are not its true eyes.
Is it just like is it there for decoration? Is there to fake out? Like, is there a Pokemon purpose to having fake eyes like that?
Not that I've seen. It wouldn't surprise me if So lots of different animals have, their normal seeing eyes, and then just sort of a light sensitive organ at the top of their head. A lot of different types of lizards do that, where it's like it can tell light from dark, but can't actually make out like an image or anything. I know tuataras, which are a type of, it looks a lot like a lizard, but they're not technically lizards, are very famous for this because you can actually sort of see it in their scale pattern. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was what they were, might have been thinking, although I kind of doubt that they had any kind of real purpose to it.
Okay.
But, so, not too bad of a representation for a horseshoe crab.
I was gonna say it's got to have the tail and blue blood. Don't the horseshoe crabs have blue blood?
They sure do. It's because they use a very different compound. So we use hemoglobin in our blood, which is iron-based, and that's why your blood is red when it has oxygen in it, and blue when it's not. They use copper instead of iron in their version of hemoglobin, and so copper, when it is oxygenated, turns blue.
Okay.
So when Kabuto evolves, it evolves into Kabutops, which is very different. It looks very different, compared to Omanite and Omastar. It suddenly has, legs and things, but it is still based off of, at least loosely, based off of a couple different kinds of fossil Pokemon. They're real world fossils. So its head is mostly based off of a group of animals called trilobites. Trilobites are very famous fossils because they are around for a super long time and are incredibly diverse while they are around. And so they're called trilobites because they have 3 body segments going across their body from left to right. So as you can see here on Kabutops' head, it has the one on either side and then the one in the middle. So it's got like 3 lobes. That's where trilobite comes from.
It almost looks like a stingray, like his head.
Yeah,
the
a
way
little
it's shaped.
bit. Yeah, and so you will very frequently find trilobite heads just by themselves, and they look very similar to what you see on Kabutops' head there. The eyes are different because trilobites have compound eyes like you would think of with like a fly or something, instead of, more, mammalian-looking eyes like that. But the rest of Kabutops' body is probably based off of a group of animals called Eurypterids, which are... mostly they're more commonly referred to in like the public as sea scorpions. Because
so we're kind of Frankensteining some Pokemon here. We got like a trilobite head and other thing that's for the body.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Which, that's fine. I'll take it. They're both really cool groups of animals, and I get to talk more about them. So,
this guy runs fast. Go run again. That guy was fat. You're going. There he is. Bam.
Yeah.
He's not letting you get that far away. Look at that.
No.
Look at this guy.
And so Generation 1 is also really unique, and that is the only generation to give us 5 fossil Pokemon. So in addition to these 2 different groups, they also gave us this Pokemon here, which is called Aerodactyl.
I think I know where they might have got this one from.
Yeah, absolutely. This is some kind of pterosaur, which are, very commonly referred to in the public as pterodactyls. So instead of just calling it pterodactyl, they called it Aerodactyl because,
Which is a great name. Like, great idea for a name, whoever came up with that. We did an episode on pterodactyls and pterosaurs, didn't we?
We absolutely did. I need to get better at remembering what episode number things are. But I know that
we should plan better and have hey, we're gonna bring up this episode at some point. But
yeah, and it's like if I had my spreadsheet or my our Google Doc in front of me, I think I did have it on there. But off the top of my head, I don't remember. But this is actually an okay representation of a pterosaur in media. At least
the head seems big.
You'd be surprised. Probably for
really?
as big as this thing is, its wings should be a bit bigger. But the head, depending on what its niche was, seems about right. It actually seems a little short.
Huh, okay.
But what they did really interestingly is they gave its top jaw is like a beak, but its bottom jaw is like a normal jaw with teeth. Which, to my knowledge, is not a thing that ever is seen in pterosaurs.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's something weird with that.
Yeah, because it wouldn't work. Whatever this thing is trying to eat, it wouldn't work very well for that. Teeth really only work if they have other teeth to sort of rub against and chew against. Yeah. One thing that this thing does that every pterosaur in media sort of falls into is that they make its feet grabby feet like birds. And as we mentioned,
I remember this came up with us, yeah.
Yeah, in our episode about pterosaurs, that's not a thing. Pterosaurs had walking feet that look much more like your feet than they do bird feet. Which is very strange to people, because everything that you've ever seen a pterosaur in gives them grabby feet. But that's not really the case. And then lastly, if you might be able to see Aerodactyl's tail there, how it's got that sort of devil point. That seems like something I just made up, just for like aesthetics. But there are a number of pterosaurs that had some kind of vein back there. And vein, I mean, as in like a weather vein almost, or like some kind of panel of skin or some kind of other flesh that made sort of a tip like that. So that is
really
not common, but also not unheard of in pterosaurs.
Do you think they were actually thinking of that while making this Pokemon?
Yes,
or were they
no.
just like, devil horn, cool, or devil tail, good?
I think that they probably were drawing inspiration from other media, which at some point presumably took it from the real fossils. So
okay, fair enough.
Probably indirectly, but I know in these first generation games, in Red and Blue, in the Pokedex 4, Aerodactyl calls it a dinosaur. And they never made that mistake again. I think somebody's kid got angry at them. Because as your child may tell you, pterosaurs are not dinosaurs.
And we also discussed that at some point in that pterosaur episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to swap out these Pokemon for some others, and we will be right back. All right, so for this next group of fossils, it's interesting. So almost every Pokemon generation gave us new fossils. 2 of them didn't. Generation 2 and Generation 7 didn't, so we're moving on from Generation 1 to Generation 3, which gave us...
Skipping that sophomore slump.
Exactly. So, right here we have the first of the Generation 3 fossils, which is called Lilipe. So it is based off of... This is a
flower. This is a flower that can walk.
Sort of. So if we see it walks also very slowly, and it kind of gallops almost with its little feet. So this is based off of a real-world animal that is still around today. And notice how I said animal and not plant.
That's where the nose were coming from. What do you... No.
So, and hopefully editing, Gavin remembers to put, like, pictures of the real-world, fossil animals in here somewhere.
If he doesn't, make sure you let him hear it in the comments, everybody.
Absolutely. So, Lilipe and its evolution, which I'll talk about in a sec, are based off of animals called crinoids. They are related to things like sea stars, things like sea urchins, in that they are members of a group called echinoderms. So they basically have a starfish. So what look like the petals on this thing are normally in a crinoid, little tiny sea star like arms that come off of the head part, which in crinoids is called the calyx, which I think is Greek or Latin for crown, I believe. And so what it here shows as like its little legs and its like main body is actually a segment called the holdfast, which does exactly what it sounds like. It holds the thing to the sediment, so it just like sits on the sediment and picks out little tiny, microorganisms from the water column and eats those instead of something like a sea star, which actively hunts and are strong enough to like just rip clamshells apart and pull out the meat inside of a clamshell and eat that. These guys are much more passive in how they eat.
So where are these located? Like the real world, whatever they are?
Yeah, so the fossils were pretty much everywhere up until probably around the end Permian mass extinction, which was around 251 million years ago. They were extremely common in like shallow reef environments. So these are also underwater. But nowadays they're only found at like basically the borderline between like when the oceanic shelf sort of drops off into like the super deep water. That's mostly where they're found today. They're not very common, but they are still around.
Gotcha. And so these are other like water creatures, because that's part of what was getting me, was just seeing this on land and trying to picture it. Like, that was hard to do. But if these are water creatures, I guess that makes a little more sense.
Exactly. But Pokemon sort of fell into the trap that a lot of people do, because these are colloquially called sea lilies. Like I said, Eurypterids are sort of colloquially called sea scorpions. These are sea lilies, even though, like I said, they're not plants, they're animals. But Pokemon, in their wisdom, made them a grass-type Pokemon.
Now that seems wrong.
And, like, granted, there are lots of grass-type Pokemon that are not literal plants. But these ones are just animals. And so we'll show you Lilipe's evolution, which is called Cradily.
Alright.
And so it also looks quite flowery. And so not too much else really to say about this compared to Lilipe. It's also just real slow.
Just squaddling along. Yeah.
Yeah.
In these Pokemon games, is there like a water mode where you can go into the water, and then these Pokemon that should be better equipped for water, even though these are grass type Pokemon, like, can actually move around and function better? Or is it just you're on land the whole time?
Yes and no. So the Pokemon are only out and sort of following you in certain areas of this game.
Okay.
So there are some, mostly like certain fish Pokemon that will not come out on land and will only follow you if you're in the water.
Mm-hmm.
But no, if I were to go into the water, this thing would go back into its Pokeball and not be out and about following me.
Oh, well that's, yeah.
Yeah, so this is...
You win some, you lose some, I guess.
Yeah. Alright, so that is one pair of the Generation 3 fossil Pokemon. The other pair starts off with Anarith here, who, once again, is a water creature. So this is the one that I talked about probably, I think, for the longest in our actual episode about fossil Pokemon, because this is literally just the actual fossil animal called Anomalocaris. And so,
any relation to like a lobster or something?
So their closest living relatives are crustaceans like that. Although these are not crustaceans, it is often referred to as some kind of shrimp, even though, like I said, it's not truly, a member of that group. But pretty much the only difference between what you see here and the actual fossil animal is, I think, it had more of the little wing-like things on the side instead of just the 4 on each side.
So like there was the real one, the wings or feathers or whatever those are, they're smaller, but there's more of them. It's not like the actual body is longer.
Right. It might be a little more elongated.
Okay.
Maybe just the shape of it was a little bit different so that it could have more of them. That and the eyes were probably more compound eye-like instead of, like I said, more, camera style eyes like you see here, like your own eyes. And that instead of here for the frontal parts, those are claws. In Anomalocaris, they were more arm-like, where they could move stuff. They didn't have like a tip on the end of it. But other than that, it is the exact same shape, roughly the exact same size as Anomalocaris would be. Instead of making this one like float or anything, they just make it crawl around. And even though, like I said, this should belong in the water as well, they made it a bug type, which is fitting. I see that.
I mean, like with all of this, like this is a game with, I was gonna say made up creatures.
No, it definitely has made up creatures, 100%.
Right. So like call them whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly. And so we go from probably the fossil Pokemon that is most accurate to its real world counterpart, to when it evolves, I don't really even have too much to say about it.
What?
Because it evolves into this thing called Armaldo.
Armaldo.
Which is a great name.
Armaldo.
And also, I really like this Pokemon. But, like, all remnants of it being like Anomalocaris are just kind of gone. It suddenly
You got those little wing feather things on the side still, but yeah.
Yep, and it still has the big claws, and it still has, you know, the sort of symbol on its head there is the same as it was, but it suddenly grew a long tail and back legs, and then the sort of things that you see coming off of either side below the wing-like things are also new for some reason, and those are supposed to be how this one swims through the water. Not like I looked for a bit of like what could this be from the fossil record, and there really isn't anything.
This is just someone having fun.
Exactly. And like I said, I really enjoy this Pokemon, but it doesn't really have much to do with fossils anymore, so we're just gonna move up again.
Let's do it.
All right, so we made an executive decision in that we're gonna make this a two-parter. Just because it's already getting a little long, and plus we have to switch games anyway. So we're going to skip the Generation 4 fossils, because those ones are not in this game, as well as some other fossil-adjacent Pokemon. We're going to do in a sort of Part 2 at some point in the future. Probably not too far in the future from now. But we're going to do those in the future. So we're going to talk about these guys real quick, and then we will see you in the eventual Part 2. So, this is...
Bird.
It is a bird, sort of. And so this is the first Generation 5 fossil Pokemon named Arkin. And so it is clearly bird adjacent, but it doesn't fly, and it still looks very reptile-y.
So what does this Pokemon do? Like, I know how, you know, Pokemon have different ways they can attack and everything. What is this one going to do?
It pecks stuff, I guess.
It doesn't seem very effective.
It can fly a little bit, but not much.
Okay. So in battle, this one's not going to be too useful for you, it sounds like.
No, it's actually pretty bad.
Okay.
But this is based off of the fossil, which you've probably heard of, called Archaeopteryx. Which is... we have bird relatives older than it, but Archaeopteryx is the most basal, meaning the thing that is technically a bird that is most like its dinosaur ancestors. And so that is what Arkin and its evolution are based off of. And something that's really cool is, you see how it sort of flaps its wings as it runs?
Yeah.
So we had a whole episode also about the evolution of flight. And so that is one hypothesis as to how flight in birds might have evolved. There's sort of two different competing thoughts about it. There's one called the tree down, which, you know, things basically implies that dinosaurs were living in trees gliding around, and then that gliding turned into powered flight, which makes more sense just intuitively, but that's not mechanically sort of what the fossils seem to support at this point. Instead, the fossils seem to better support the idea of the ground up hypothesis, which is as the the dinosaur ancestors of birds, you know, got more feathery, got lighter bones. They basically just started to flap their wings as they ran, and that gave them, you know, a better advantage. If they wanted to jump, it would, you know, help them, you know, jump farther. And eventually, that natural flapping motion, similar to how you move your arms back and forth as you walk, that was just sort of the natural motion that they did. And eventually, that turned into powered flight.
Wow, okay. That's actually kind of cool, just the idea of... I like that ground up kind of approach. You know, the tree down does make some sort of intuitive sense, but I like the idea of, you know, pumping your arms, essentially, you know, giving you those kinds of boosts, and that, you know, evolving over time into actual flight. That's I don't know, that's a cool way to think about the process happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, that seems to be what the fossils support more. Although I I don't study that kind of thing, so I don't know. That's just sort of the last evidence that I heard. So when Arkin evolves, it evolves into this weird snake bird thing called Archaeops. You know, very clearly not straying too far from Archaeopteryx, which when it walks slowly, it just sort of walks. But when it runs, it flies like a demon. So
Look at this guy.
Yeah,
Look at this guy.
Not too much else to say about Archaeops here, other than that he's just so goofy. It definitely Archaeopteryx is very strange in that, yeah, it has a lot of dinosaur features that aren't yet quite bird-like, but its head doesn't look like a snake like that. That's just an interesting design choice that I think that they kind of made with Archaeops here. It actually reminds me a bit more of Quetzalcoatl, which is like an Aztec feathery snake god that could fly.
Right.
So maybe they got some kind of inspiration from that here as well, for some reason. But let's.
This guy looks like he flies a little bit better than the old one.
Yeah, but not a lot. I think
Okay.
it's somewhere in the Pokedex it said that it has to start running before it can fly.
Okay.
So like it can only take off after it has like a runway, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay.
So let's swap over to the second set of Generation 5 fossils here. Starting with Turtuga, which is literally just a sea turtle. I don't really have too much else to say about Turtuga.
Have we talked about turtles at all in any of our episodes?
No, and I'm kind of afraid to.
Now, why is that? Because that sounds like an interesting kind of topic to go into.
It would be. Turtles are very strange in that, you know, yeah, birds are really strange, but we have an excellent bird fossil record of their ancestors, and we know where they belong. We have no idea really where turtles go. On like the reptile family tree, we know they're reptiles, and you know fit in alongside lizards and crocodilians and such. But where in that really diverse group they fit, we kind of just don't know. And so we have good fossils that are turtles, but how they got to being turtles, we don't really know.
Well, if you're an expert out there, let us know, because we would love to have you on to try and figure that out. Also, is this guy like getting mad at you? Or I see question marks and exclamation points coming out of him. Like,
yeah, I'm not sure what he's quite doing. He's kind of just doing his own thing.
All right.
And so Turtuga and its evolution here, called Caracosta, are, I think, supposed to be based off of two of the largest sea turtle species from the fossil record. One of them is called Archelon, which is mostly known from South Dakota, where I used to live, during the Cretaceous period, when most of the middle of North America was a shallow ocean. And so there were some giant sea turtles around at that time. And I think that that's what they're supposed to be based off of. But very similarly to Armaldo, Caracosta here just kind of throws it out of the way. And it's like, I'm going to walk upright like a person now.
This looks like a 4-year-old that just loves to throw his body around to things. Like, you know what I'm talking about?
Yep, it just seems very
4-year-old, never wearing a shirt.
Very floppy.
Yeah. Look at this guy. Okay. Yep. I'm into this guy. This guy looks like a real, goofy kind of thing. But if you tell him to do something, he will accomplish that task. But he's not the brains of the operation.
Exactly. And like I said about Armaldo, I really like this Pokemon. It's just not that relevant to the fossil stuff anymore. So we're gonna move on. And so here we have the first of the Generation 6 fossils, which very clearly is based off of a particular dinosaur. It'll become even more evident once we look at its evolution, but this Pokemon is called Tyrunt.
Tyrunt? Runt of the litter?
Yeah, it's mostly meaning runt as in just small.
Okay.
But it is based off of T-Rex, and I'm shocked that it took them this long to come up with a T-Rex fossil Pokemon. Because this came out in Generation 6, which I think came out in 2012-ish? So almost 20
T-Rex
years.
is kind of top of the list.
Yeah, almost 20 years after the first Pokemon games. And so I'm really surprised it took them this long. And so it's really funny. So it's much more prominent when we see its evolved form. But you see the sort of frill or something behind its head?
Yes.
Those are stated to be not quite feathers, but feather-like, which around the time when this game was in development was a really interesting conversation that was going on in like real-world paleontology about whether T-Rex and other large theropod dinosaurs had feathers, because we knew that some of the smaller theropod dinosaurs did, but when it came to some of the big ones, we weren't really sure. So this is
wizard over here.
Yeah, this is what Tyrant evolves into, called Tyrantrum.
This guy looks like an old sage wizard dinosaur. Like, I don't know. I trust this guy.
So, I mean, supposedly it's extremely violent and will just chew cars in half, but that's neither here nor there. So it's supposed to sort of evoke like a kingliness. Sort of that thing on the top of its head is supposed to be crown-like, and the sort of frill of feather-like things behind its head is supposed to be like a Shakespearean era, royalty
Garment.
right?
Yeah.
And so but that's also again outwardly stated in the Pokedex that is feather-like, as well as sort of its chin, beard stuff is feather-like.
You've mentioned this a couple times, but like, what is the Pokedex?
So it is basically a plot device in the games that the games use to get you to actually go out and catch Pokemon. So it's like when you catch a new Pokemon, it gives you, a couple sentences of just, information that about that Pokemon. Some are better than others. Particularly in the early games, they were very fantastical, and even for being, a Pokemon game, unrealistic. Saying things like certain Pokemon, like a very famous Pokemon called Ponyta, which is just a fiery horse Pokemon, could jump over the Eiffel Tower, which, like, the physics behind that don't work.
Not yet.
And also, for the same Pokemon, said that its hooves are harder than diamonds.
I thought that wasn't a thing.
At least in the real world, it's not, but apparently it is. So again, they get a little more reined in over time,
which I think is almost like that's the opposite of what I would have expected. I would have expected.
Oh, the Pokemon themselves get way more over the top, but the information about them gets a little bit more grounded, I guess.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, and speaking of that, Tyrantrum is really interesting because one of its Pokedex entries directly says that, so these Pokemon, the way fossil Pokemon are, found is you find a fossil, you bring it to a specific character in the game, and they turn it into a Pokemon, a la Jurassic Park. And so Tyrantrum is interesting because its Pokedex explicitly says, scientists in these games don't think that this is how it actually looked when it was alive, the first time, before it was fossilized. They think that like the process of bringing it back makes it look different, and that along with talk about the feathers kind of makes it seem like it might have been covered in feathers when it was alive the first time.
Okay. I mean,
yeah, which is really interesting.
I know feathers is always a fun topic of conversation when it comes to actual dinosaurs, so
yeah, absolutely. But we're not going to expand on that because we don't have time.
Not here. Listen to the podcast.
Exactly. And so for the last set we're going to talk about in this episode, we have probably my favorite fossil, duo.
This guy's adorable.
Yeah, so this is Amora. It is based off of a sauropod dinosaur, a la Brachiosaurus, quote-unquote Brontosaurus. We've talked about how Brontosaurus isn't really a thing. But, you know, Amora and its evolution are based off of a specific genus of sauropod called Amargasaurus, which is well known for having the vertebrae in its neck have two long spines coming off of it on either side. It'll be more clear when I show its evolution. That were for quite a while sort of reconstructed as being interconnected with like to form sails, you know, a sail going down either side of its neck. That's not the current interpretation anymore, but I will swap to its evolution here. So in the fossil animal in the real life, in the real world here, instead of that being a sail, there would be long spines coming out of it on either side of its neck. And so, like I said, for a while that was sort of interpreted that all the spines were connected to form these big sails, but nowadays it's more thought that they had like a keratin sheath around them, similar to like how cow horns do, that they were used for defense of some kind, because while they were sauropods, they weren't the biggest of sauropods, so they probably were still, facing different predators.
So like those big flowing whatever they are is there, like, right. That may have been the thinking at one point, but our best understanding now is that was a lot more reined in.
Right, and it's like they were never thought to have been this, big and flowy, but they were thought to have been potentially for like thermoregulation, controlling its body temperature. But what's really cool about these two Pokemon is that, so they are Ice-type Pokemon. And so something really cool that the game developers did, whoever designed these Pokemon, to make it, seem more icy, they make its sails glow different colors like auroras, which is really cool.
Are you doing that, or is it doing that on its own?
It's doing that by itself. I'm trying to get it to do it, but it's not letting me do anything.
It just did it.
Well, because they can glow different colors besides just that greenish color.
Really?
Yeah, let me see if I can make it glow, because they can also grow like a reddish color when it's angry.
Are there any animals in real life that do something similar, or is this strictly a fictional Pokemon thing?
I think that's pretty strictly a Pokemon thing.
Gotcha, okay.
There are lots of bioluminescent Pokemon, things like that do things like fireflies. Especially in the oceans, there are lots of different animals that do different glowing things. But there are not a ton of them that live on land. So I think that is going to do it for this part 1. We don't want to make it, super, super long. But
I'm happy with that.
Yeah. So this will wrap up this little part 1 of this episode. So make sure to check back and subscribe to the YouTube channel for future exclusives. Or if this is just where you prefer to listen to the podcast, feel free to subscribe. It would really help us out.
And definitely please let us know what kind of episodes, both of the regular show as well as any YouTube extras you would like to see in the future. This has been the first time we've tried this. I had fun, and we can try some different things as we go throughout it. But I believe this will be the last piece of content we post in 2021.
Yeah, depending on when we end up putting out the part 2, this will probably be the last thing that comes out. I think this will probably go up on New Year's Eve if, all goes according to plan. But who knows when we'll get around to part 2. I'm not sure.
So happy New Year's Eve or New Year's Day or whenever on Earth this gets uploaded, whenever on Earth you are seeing this.
Absolutely.